Misty Winston. I don't know where my co-host is. He was supposed to be here. He's not here. He may end up jumping in eventually. We'll see how this goes. But I was impatient and tired of waiting. So you just get me today. And also a very special guest. This is somebody who I've been following on Twitter for a long time, has really interesting takes. So I'm really excited to talk to him about some of the things that are going on in today's news. So today we have a contributor from the Amplifier Project, Jesse Crall, on the show. So thank you so much, Jesse, for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Misty, for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, of course. I'm sorry my co-host is not here yet. We'll see if he pops in. It's possible. He is habitually late, so it's, we'll see how that goes. But first I wanted to, like I said, I've been following you on Twitter for a long time, and you're actually like really starting to pick up some steam. I think a lot of people are catching on. You have really great takes on a lot of the issues that I care about and follow. So I kind of wanted to start off talking about this latest batch of kind of soft censorship that we've seen over the last week. I think it started with Graham Elwood got demonetized on YouTube. It followed with like a huge batch of kind of left-leaning channels on YouTube, Convo Couch, Nico, Frank Analysis. A bunch of people got wiped out all in one day. What do you think about that as we move into the Joe Biden era? I've always said that he's going to be worse than Trump on censorship. What do you think?
Well, I think one of the big problems is during Trump, a lot of people on the left were very much engaged in let's get Trump off Twitter. Trump's a disgrace. We have to censor the right. We have to worry about Nazis. It's this big fascist threat. And, a handful of us were saying, well, you realize it's going to go both ways. The left, anyone who's against imperialism or who's taking on establishment figures is going to be as much a threat to Joe Biden and the Democratic establishment as Trump is. Now, I'm opposed to censorship just broadly. It's not just my team's going to get censored, so I don't want Trump to get censored. It's broad. I don't want anyone to get censored. But this was very, very predictable. And, there's always going to be this kind of loophole like, well, no, they're not being, censored. It's just demonetized. And it has the same purpose. It's to marginalize certain voices to make sure that you get the most mainstream acceptable establishment positions flooding your eyes and ears at all times. It's dangerous.
It is dangerous. And I think that, people, you're right. People like to say that, well, they're not censored. They can still go on YouTube. They can still do their show. But when these content creators have built up, this is their job now. This is what they do for a living. And so when you take away a big portion of their income, you're going to do one of two things. You're going to push them off the platform because they can no longer afford to do it, or they're going to start self-censoring to prevent this from happening to them again. And so it really becomes, like you said, it really is the goal. I mean, it may not look like hard, that's why I called it soft censorship. It's not like this hard, you're off the platform. But I really do think that that's where we're headed. And the censorship of the right, a lot of us have been screaming about this for ages. And it's always been really frustrating to me that people can't make the connection between, yes, calling for that person that you don't like to be censored will come back to you. How do you think that we can get people to make that connection and make people realize that this is, a really self-defeating call for censorship?
Well, I think one of the difficult aspects is when you're dealing with the sort of center left liberals who might, share some positions with the hard left or whatever. They don't see the connection because they don't have any kind of take that's going to be all that controversial. They don't see the risk that's going to come back to them. So the real challenge is when people who are on the more far left, people who consider themselves real anti-establishment figures, are still calling for Donald Trump to be censored. I know, I think it was Jordan Sheridan was with Status Quo was saying, oh, we got to get Trump off. And now it came back to bite him. And he's saying, all right, I was wrong. So if it bites you directly, you might change your position, but you still have to understand that there's going to be this broader number of people who need to recognize this, who might not be directly affected, but who are still consuming a lot of different media and can see people that they might respect get demonetized, and they were part of the crowd that was cheering on censorship more broadly. I mean, the fact is, we have to understand that the best way to beat an argument is to make a better argument, not to silence people. If you're apolitical or you're just getting into politics, you're a teenager, you're depressed about the world, and you see one side getting demonetized and deplatformed and the other side calling for them to be demonetized and deplatformed, who do you think is going to be the more interesting figure for you to gravitate towards? And that might be, the interesting figures getting deplatformed might be on the right, they might be even on the far right, and people are going to see that that group as a real threat to the status quo that they see as being this very dangerous force in the world. So I think I really just don't like the way that the left often operates so much out of fear. That's what it is. You know, we got to get Trump off Twitter. You sound scared. A lot of people aren't going to gravitate towards the scared group. They're going to gravitate towards the group getting deplatformed, soft censored, or directly censored because it just seems more interesting. It seems like a bigger threat. So it's dangerous.
Yes. And I think you're right. I think it is a lot to do with fear. I also think that there's a significant portion of the left, which I hate, like that, the left. I hate that. It's, kind of been co-opted and bastardized, and it doesn't really mean anything at this point. But I think that there's also a significant portion of them who would rather sit smugly in their safe space than examine, controversial topics or controversial people, controversial ideas. They don't want to reach outside of their little bubble. And I think that when you brought up Jordan Sheridan, that's a very interesting aspect because I've been following Jordan since his TYT days. I've long been a fan. He did great work in Flint. And then, when he came out talking about, and it actually wasn't just Trump, he actually called for Convo Couch to be taken off the air was the quote that he used. And the reason he said that they needed to be taken from the air was because they were covering election integrity, which he then perceived as being a conspiracy theory about the election, which there were absolutely some channels and some people who were talking conspiratorially about the election. But Convo Couch does a great job on election integrity. They actually, go and sit through the long and boring meetings about all of the procedural stuff. And, they really do their homework and they really, try to investigate into the machines and how they're, on this crazy, we can't ever, there's no audit, there's no any way for us to like take an actual look at how the election went and if it was legitimate. So he's an interesting figure for me. I was appreciative of the fact that he did finally come back and say that he was wrong. It was kind of a backhanded apology, but you take what you can get at that point. But that's another aspect of this. And just today, we were just speaking about this, but just today I actually dealt with this too, where somebody said that Nico deserved to be deplatformed because he was pushing conspiracy theories. And they use that as a justification for him to get demonetized. What's your take on the whole conspiracy theory stuff? Because to me, it feels like a weapon that's used against any narrative that strays outside the approved narrative. What do you think?
Well, it's very deliberate. The idea is you attach, I saw a QAnon video recently, and I have to wonder if it was from a more established source, like domestic law enforcement, because what it did was it was a video that showed all the problems in the United States, and they were real. It was the opioid crisis, the endless wars. It had, if you didn't know anything about QAnon, you would think it was coming from a left perspective. And the only part where it started to go awry is when it said, and there were good people trying to save us from these problems, and then it pointed to Donald Trump and Michael Flynn, and that's when you kind of got into the Q element. But what the establishment is trying to do, whether it's domestic law enforcement, broader intelligence, government, mainstream media, is to tie anybody questioning the status quo to a conspiracy. If you're talking about the real reason we were in Yemen, and the real reason we were dealing with Afghanistan, and you go against that establishment, fiction, they're going to tie you to conspiracy theories. They're going to tie you to QAnon. They're going to tie you to all the crazies and yahoos. And it's going to delegitimize the points that you're making, even if you're dealing explicitly with facts. And it's also critical that if you think somebody is spewing conspiracy theories that are wrong, show why. Offer a better explanation. If you disagree with something Nico was saying and he has enough of a platform and you share a certain audience that it's worth engaging with, show why he's wrong. Explain why he's wrong. To say he needs to be deplatformed, it goes back to my comment about the fear. I have absolutely no idea why you would look at someone like Nico and say he needs to get off the air. He's such a threat. Make a better case. I've disagreed with Nico on some issues, but it's something that you deal with your own story, narrative, fact analysis, not dealing with getting him off the air. That just makes you look like you're the conspiracy theorist because you can't handle your ideas being held up to any kind of scrutiny.
Yes. And it really is. I mean, I know it's like a cliche saying, but the only way to fight bad speech is with more speech. You can't,
Yeah.
ignoring a problem never makes it go away. You can't just, shove these people off to the side and, they're just going to go away. That you just push them underground. It almost inevitably makes them kind of stronger and more, you prove their point for them, really. I mean, to some degree. But yeah, this conspiracy theory thing that has been going, and they've been using this for decades. This is not something new, but they've definitely been using it in a more heavy-handed way at this point. And I think it's interesting that talking, and the video in question was where Nico was talking about Pizzagate. He didn't push Pizzagate. He didn't claim it was legitimate. He didn't say anything about it was, hard fact. He just covered it. It is, sorry, cattail. he
Yeah,
just,
I've got cats all over the place. Yeah.
sorry. But he really did just cover the issue. He talked a little bit about the Podesta emails and the kind of weird language that is found in the Podesta emails that sort of lines up with the FBI language surrounding child pedophilia and trafficking, which I think is a super interesting subject. I think that's something that should be talked about. And, he at some point did call for an investigation. And I think that that's a legitimate call for an investigation, especially given now what we know about Jeffrey Epstein and, his shenanigans. I think that there's definitely, I mean, is Pizzagate itself the actual story of Pizzagate? Are there like underground tunnels beneath pizza shops, where they're trafficking children? Probably not, but there's some underlying truth to that story where there are powerful people engaged in child trafficking and child pedophilia. I don't think that's a debatable thing now at this point. So calling that a conspiracy theory and relegating it to like the nut bin conversation is really damaging, because to me, I would rather investigate a million cases of child abuse of any form and be wrong than fail to investigate one case of child abuse and it was right. So it seems like it's very weird. They do the same thing with Seth Rich, which just to me, I love true crime. I'm a true crime nerd. And so the unsolved murder of a DNC employee following a massive leak of information that was framed as a botched robbery, but nothing was taken. That's very interesting to me. Like, that's an interesting story. So it's a weird thing when people tell you can't talk about it. Anytime somebody tells me I can't talk about something, it just makes me more interested. So it almost hurts them by doing that to some degree. But yeah, I wanted to shift gears a little bit because in talking about censorship, um, we can talk about AOC, who has been a huge leader in this call for more censorship, which I find super interesting, especially given that she's receiving very little pushback from quote unquote the left on that issue. She's really been leading the charge on that. What do you think about that? Like, what do you think about the fact that we have a quote unquote progressive leader leading the call for more censorship in Congress?
AOC and I have a similar background in a lot of ways. We're about the same age, similar economic background. She's from, New York and went to school at Boston University. I'm from Los Angeles, went to UCLA. I think we came up in the same kind of environment, the same, I, a lot of people think that she's some kind of wrecker or they think she's some hero from the left. I think she's just acting in the way that she came up with her certain politics, the same way people who came of age during the Vietnam protests are going to have a certain kind of politics, the new left in the 60s, the new left today. So I don't think there's very much deliberate. I think she's an earnest actor. That doesn't mean she's not destructive. I think she's done a lot of damage, particularly in recent months. It's not that she's deliberate. It's that she honestly believes that she is right, her opponents are wrong, and the best approach to that is not to be more open and to not offer this nonpartisan challenge to destructive forces in our economics, in our foreign policy, in our media, but instead to try to silence your opposition, because that's what I grew up with. The idea was, you need, cancel culture and getting people off the air and all that. So I think the real danger with isn't just with AOC, but it's like you said, it's with the people carrying AOC's water uncritically, and the way that she has used what I imagine are very real traumas in her life to make a political argument against her opponents is also very dangerous. Because if you criticize AOC's political messaging, it becomes lumped into criticizing AOC's personal experience or, her sexual assault, which is, it's a very dangerous route. I mean, we saw something similar with John McCain. He used his experience in a Vietnamese prison camp to continuously push for more and more war, and his past legitimized him in the eyes of the media. I don't think AOC is calling to invade Iraq or another country, but there still is a real danger in calling to silence your opponents. It makes her look bad. It makes her look very weak. And it goes back to my point about, if you're apolitical, you're just getting into politics and you see one side calling to silence your opponent, you're probably not going to gravitate towards that if you didn't grow up in this left liberal environment. And if you want to have better material politics, if you want to have anti-imperialist politics, you need to bring in a large group of people that aren't currently on your side. And I think AOC is not going to do that with this current approach. Her approval ratings are 5 points underwater. I think her appeal is very limited to urban, educated left liberals. And that's a base that is not expanding outside major cities, and it has to.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I think that brings up an interesting point of the people who quote unquote carry water for her. I've found that to be something super interesting in the media kind of realm. Watching people like Jeremy Scahill give her a just horribly softball interview with very little pushback. Of course, being an Assange activist, I was super hyper focused on the fact that finally, I'll give him credit for this. Finally, somebody asked her about Julian Assange. Her answer was terrible, but he offered no pushback for that. Ryan Grimm does the same thing. He runs around Twitter defending her all day. I find that very dangerous that we have these media outlets, especially media outlets who at least have the patina of being independent. I mean, the Intercept is in no way an independent media outlet. The fact that they fundraise on that is offensive to me. But yeah, they are no way an independent media outlet, but we have these media, sources. Literally, it's almost like a fan club for these politicians. I find that to be incredibly dangerous. And I think that it speaks to how access journalism is really been a dangerous force in our political, our political world. Can you speak to that a little bit and the things that you've noticed as far as access journalism, especially, I'm not talking mainstream media here. We expect that from mainstream media, but we're now seeing more of, the kind of the independent lefty media sites kind of take this approach. And to me, that seems very dangerous. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, AOC, like anyone else in Congress, is a public servant. Their job is to be held accountable and to, you advocate on your behalf and try to get them to, pursue your agenda. And if they don't do that, you try to elect somebody else. Jimmy Dore made this complaint last year a number of times, which is that the squad, or, left politicians, or supposedly left, don't come on a show anymore. AOC went on his show when she was running. She no longer does. If you look at her Twitter feed, her sources are almost always CNN, MSNBC, very mainstream. And I think it's fear on her part. She doesn't want to engage in more controversial topics to draw attention to those things. I don't think you're going to ever see her referencing the gray zone. Periodically, a squad member will retweet Rania Kalik or something, and they get a ration of shit from people who find that so offensive, and this, the Syria hawks going after them. So I think one of the big problems with somebody like Ryan Grimm is he wants that access, as you said. He's not going to push back. He was a major supporter of Elizabeth Warren. Of course, he said, I support Bernie and Warren, but he was, pursuing a line with Elizabeth Warren that wasn't based in reality. He got actively offended if you brought up Warren's previous insinuation that she was, Cherokee. And, with AOC's foreign policy is not good. It's better than the average Democrat. I don't think she's, a regime change hawk, but she's been very lazy about sanctions. She voted to expand NATO or strengthen NATO, one of her first votes. She does not talk about Afghanistan. She does not talk about drone strikes. She will not go out of the very established sentiments to make any kind of foreign policy point. She sticks with domestic policy. Well, that's okay if all you care about is domestic policy, but Jeremy Scahill has done very good work on foreign policy, and he had a real opportunity to push her on that. Now, I guess I understand why you might, particularly if you're older than I am, you're so desperate for anyone on the left to be in Congress that you might take what you can get. But AOC could be a leader. She has the platform, she has the audience, and I think too often when she does take a leadership position, it has very little to do with pushing against the Democratic status quo. It too often pushes against the Republican status quo. We don't need that. We've already got 200 Democratic members of Congress who will bash Republicans, bash Trump, bash the right all the time. I'm more interested in someone who's willing to take on their own tribe, and she hasn't been doing that.
No, and I find that super interesting too, because that is, I mean, that was the whole point of her campaign. That was the whole point of her being elected. That was, she was going to go and she was going to challenge Nancy Pelosi. She was going to challenge the establishment, and she was going to make a difference. I mean, Jimmy Dore, as you just mentioned, has shown on his show videos of her saying those exact things. We're going to go, we can make a difference. You can do it in one. You don't have to be, if you're a one-term congresswoman, who cares? Like, you can go and you can make a difference in one term if you just have the courage to do so. And it seems that it didn't take long for her to get her mind right, if you will. Like you said, one of her first votes was to continue funding and expanding NATO. On the coup in Venezuela, Max Blumenthal directly confronted her in the halls of Congress, and she said, we'll get back to you with a statement. And then it took, I don't even know how long. I think it was weeks for her to come out and literally just say, I defer to caucus leadership. That was her position on a coup in Venezuela. So it's very interesting to me that, and it's not just her, the entire squad. She is by far the most famous, the most recognizable, the most followed. So I feel like we pick on her the most because, of those reasons. But the whole squad, the whole point of the squad was to go and challenge the Democratic establishment. Like you said, we already have plenty of people attacking Republicans. Everybody knows Republicans are trash. We need somebody who has the courage to stand up to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. And it didn't take long for the squad to completely abandon any perceived notion that was why they were there anymore. You said earlier you think that she's an honest actor. Do you think that she has just been co-opted effectively, or do you think that this is her playing some kind of long game? Some people like to say she's playing some kind of long game. Do you think it's careerism? What do you think? Because I have my own personal opinions about her. I'm interested to hear what you think about her.
Yeah, I don't. I think it's a long game in the sense that she's making a calculation similar to Bernie Sanders, which is that she believes if she pushes too hard now, she'll lose everything. If she kind of goes along with it a little bit more, builds a reputation, appeals to the MSNBC viewers, that might give her more power if she runs for statewide office in the future, I guess. I think she's largely been rewarded by the media you're talking about. She hasn't been rewarded by her own party. She hasn't gotten the committee positions she wanted. They're not going to give it to her. But one thing I think that's interesting is when the squad got elected, there was this big push. Oh my God, we're moving to the left. Congress is finally embracing these socialist voices. And what was completely ignored was that Ilhan Omar took over from Keith Ellison, who became Minnesota's attorney general. He's just as much a progressive figure as she is, very similar politics. Rashida Tlaib essentially took over from John Conyers, a longtime Michigan congressman. He had been a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. He introduced a single payer bill into Congress. And Ayanna Pressley, who is not considered as liberal or progressive as the other three, primaried Mike Capuano, who was a similar politics to Ayanna Pressley, kind of like left liberal politics. AOC was the only one who really primaried someone who was clearly to her right. And when you also include the fact that someone like Dennis Kucinich was primaried out of Congress as well, I don't think Congress is any more left than it was 10 years ago. It's just the squad banded together. There was good PR. They have a higher profile to sort of push certain politics, but there's four of them. They're not challenging power. Now we've got Bowman and Cori Bush. We'll see. But I just don't think they've made much of a difference beyond giving people on the left some kind of hope that something is changing, but it's not backed by any coherent action.
Yes, and that is my exact fear with them. It's the sheepdog effect. Whether or not they are knowing sheepdogs, that's the role that they're playing. They are enticing people, disenfranchised people, people who are furious with the system, they're kind of giving them a reason to hold on hope that the Democratic Party can be somehow reformed. After the 2016 election, that was Bernie's whole thing. We're going to reform the Democratic Party. Just from my viewpoint, the party's worse now than they were in 2016. They've gotten much worse. There's a lot of things that they are doing that are further to the right. There's a lot of policy positions that they're either pushing or refusing to push. So yeah, I definitely think that that's the danger with the squad, is that they are bringing people into a system that is designed to fail you. So that's always been my concern with the squad. I personally don't think that she's an honest actor. I think that maybe she was when she first started out. I think she very quickly got either she got that Washington brain that everybody talks about, that DC brain, where she realized where she was and what was required of her to maintain her career. Whether she started to really enjoy the attention and the magazine covers and the news articles that are written about her, whatever it is. Just personally, I don't think she's an honest actor. She seems very calculated to me. She tries to play. She did this in an interview. I forget, might have been on ABC, but when she, did the whole "I'm not an expert on these things," she does that a lot, where she tries to play like she's dumb, and I don't believe that in any way. I think she is very smart. I think she is extremely calculated, and I think that's what makes her dangerous. But I also think that there's a narrative kind of being spun now, where if you dare to criticize her, you're attacking a survivor. I think that that's a very dangerous thing that she's pushing. And I wanted to get your take on that, because that has been, kind of sucking the air out of the room for the past, I don't know, since January 6th, really. So what's your take on the 6th? What happened there? And the narrative that's being spun after that, following that event?
Well, I was definitely, heading up to both, the election in November and then January, in the firm, Trump is not a fascist. This is not a coup. He's not going to engage in a coup. He has no support from the intelligence agencies, the military. He doesn't have real support in government. Most Republicans can kind of take or leave him. They're just going to use him for their own agenda. He certainly doesn't have support from global finance. So all he has is a few yahoos and some, calculating members of Congress who want to get in good with him. That's it. You can't have a coup if there's no power behind it. That's my view in January. There was no power behind that. It was unusual. I'm sure it was scary if you were there. It was a serious breach of security, and there is something odd with how Capitol Police weren't prepared for something that was obviously going to happen. And so, of course, I'm fine with any investigation. I investigate everybody all the time. That's what Congress should always be investigated. I don't care. But I think framing it as surviving is a way of using a perceived weakness to your own advantage. I don't like that brand of politics. I don't think that if there's going to be any real change, if you're going to take on global finance, the military industrial complex, the political parties, the establishment, you can do that by weaponizing trauma. I don't think that's going to work. I think that's very good for your brand. But to me, that's the message that someone who wants a daytime talk show would push, not someone who wants to get real power in politics. And so, I don't want to dismiss any kind of personal reaction people had to that day, but this isn't just about your personal reaction, it's political. And you need to present an image of strength. When you talk about the civil rights movement in the 1960s, which was really taking on a fraction of the power that a real left movement in this country now would have to take on. The idea was strength. The idea was solidarity. The idea was standing together and not letting tragedy and pushback break you. If you're taking to the congressional floor for an hour and weeping about something that happened a month ago, your feelings might be genuine, but it really makes it look like you are a victim, and it doesn't project this idea of strength that's really going to take on power the way it needs to. I mean, someone made a reference to, Steve Scalise, who, I disagree with him politically on everything, but he was actually shot. He almost died, and I don't remember him being this victimized in the aftermath. That's a problem. He looked like someone who handled the tragedy well, regardless of the political disagreements I have with him. And instead, this is being weaponized to, impeach Trump after he's left office, trying to expel members of Congress who were democratically elected. I don't like Marjorie Greene. I disagree with her on just about everything, but she was elected. The Democrats didn't run a coherent challenger. That's life. She's going to be there for 2 years. You can either, give her as little airtime as possible and try to kind of marginalize her. That's what they should be doing. Or you can turn her into this giant threat for ratings and as a boogeyman to keep people's eye off whatever Joe Biden's doing. And that's what the squad and that's what the Democrats have largely decided to do. And I don't think it's remotely helpful.
No, I think actually it's and it seems very obvious to me. This is quite, you said, it's quite a distraction. I mean, people have said that she's using all of this to distract away from her failure on Force the Vote. I don't know if that's true or not. I know that she definitely failed on Force the Vote. I don't know if this is being used as a distraction from that or not. And again, I don't, was it scary for her to be there? Maybe, I don't know. I wasn't there. But you're right. I think using this for a month now to talk about nothing else is really a problem. I mean, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. People are losing their houses, people are losing their jobs, people are unable to feed their children. We have a president now who wants to reopen schools, even though teachers are, opposed to that idea, and he wants to do it because capitalism's got to keep on chugging. There are a lot of things that she could be talking about. And instead, she has spent a month talking about this traumatic experience. And, it really has completely sucked the air out of all other issues, all other things that we should be talking about. And, in a time where we can't even get $2,000 from our government, after months and months and months, that seems very shady to me. That seems like a concerted effort to distract people away from, the bad things that are actually happening in our government right now. So yeah, I would definitely agree with you that this is, and that's not even to speak on the fact that you're right. It does make them look incredibly weak and fragile. I mean, if you're that fragile where something that happened to you a month ago is still that traumatic, maybe Congress isn't for you. I mean, Congress is a tough job. I mean, you are going to get hate mail. You are going to get death threats. I think that that's across the board. I don't think that there's a member in Congress who hasn't gotten a death threat. I mean, that's just the nature of the business. When you have that much power and control, you're going to elicit, hatred and ire from people, especially when you're failing them. And that's not to condone any violence or death threats. But, people are hurting a lot right now, and that is going to boil up to the surface. When people get desperate, they do irrational things. So yeah, I would say that she's definitely kind of been using this as almost like a crutch, and a distraction. And from what I don't know, but I think that, people do need to be paying more attention to Joe Biden. And speaking of Joe Biden, we did have a kind of interesting development on Yemen. And I wanted to ask you what you thought about that. So can you explain, first of all, what Joe Biden announced, and then how that will impact what's happening in Yemen?
Yeah, so the announcement came specifically from Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, which was that the United States is going to stop offensive support for Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia's engagement with Yemen. So superficially, this looks good. And I will say, at the very least, above all else, obviously people who have been opposing this, aid, war effort, whatever you want to call it, are getting through to the administration. It's something that the administration recognizes they have to address. That's by itself an improvement at the very least. The real question is, though, we entered this engagement with Saudi Arabia in 2015 as a defensive measure. This was the idea, the PR spin was that Saudi Arabia was being attacked by the Houthis in Yemen. We had to protect them. We had to aid them against this horrible assault. This goes back to the 1970s when we made a deal to protect Saudi oil fields, and in response, they would trade oil exclusively in US dollars. This is just a pure economic alliance. But anyways, if Sullivan and the Biden administration are saying this is simply going to be a stop against offensive measures, that still leaves a lot open. That still means that we could still provide support in some ways simply by calling it a defensive measure. Maybe it's no longer the Houthis that are a threat. Maybe ISIS is in Yemen. Or Al Qaeda's in Yemen. You can say anything you want. And so that's why it's really important to understand the economic reasons for this alliance and to understand that to break that alliance, would actually require real effort and a kind of sacrifice from the Biden administration. It would break a very important tie. I think it's necessary to do that. But it's not simply that we made a mistake and it was bad and now we're pulling out of it and Saudi's going to be, A-okay with that. Another point that's important is that this war, even from the mendacious Saudi perspective, has been a failure. They've been looking for reasons to stop engaging since I think 2019 or early 2020. So it's also possible that elements of this war wind down on their own without any real effort from the Biden administration. They can call it a big PR move. Saudi Arabia can blame Joe Biden for no longer supporting them. And, everyone kind of walks away whistling as Yemenis continue to starve. So, I think it's crucial to really keep an eye on this story. Are there still going to be weapons shipments? How are they pausing certain weapons deals but allowing other weapons deals to continue? Are we, going to continue to engage in, military operations in that region? I think there was talk about building a base somewhere in Saudi Arabia. So, this is tentatively better news than we would have been getting under Donald Trump in regards to Yemen, but it's by no means an end to our support for the war. I wouldn't see it that way.
Yes, it definitely seems kind of like a surface level, a little bit of glitter sprinkled on some terrible thing to give it the shine of good. And that's kind of always been my fear with a Joe Biden presidency, is that it's very much like Barack Obama. He's not Donald Trump. He's not as abrasive. I mean, he's not Barack Obama. Joe Biden is still loud and crass and says really stupid things all the time. I think mostly they're going to try to hide him away from the public and the cameras as much as possible. I don't think he's done a sit down interview yet with any media outlet since he's been elected, which is interesting. So I think they're probably going to hide him away for the most part. But just the Biden presidency being similar to the Obama presidency in that people stop paying attention. Um, you know, uh, Once Bush was gone, the left almost completely went to sleep. Barack Obama could get away with anything because he was Barack Obama. He was well spoken and charismatic and charming, and he had a way with words and a way of saying things that made you think that everything was okay. So I have long been concerned about that. I think it will be a little bit less so this time, just because Joe Biden is so just kind of a hot mess. He people say, well, he's not Trump. He's kind of like Trump. I mean, he really doesn't have a filter, and he really doesn't have the ability to know when to shut up and when to say things and when to not say things. So I don't think it'll be at that level. But I do worry that under a Joe Biden presidency, people are going to stop paying attention, especially on foreign policy, because that's something that people don't pay attention to, generally speaking, anyways, unless that there's some massive threat like a George W. Bush who's starting wars and things like that. I mean, although Barack Obama was able to start 5 without anybody blinking an eye. So what do you see moving forward as far as foreign policy goes under a Biden administration? Do you have any of those same fears that people are going to stop paying attention? Because, as much as Trump was terrible, he was weirdly slightly less hawkish than most of our other presidents. I mean, he didn't start a new war. He sure didn't end any. But he's the first president since Carter to not start a new war. So, I mean, I try to look at him objectively, and a lot of people like to hyperventilate around Donald Trump, but, there are some things that he did that, while I wouldn't say they were good, it's, oh, okay, well, that's better than some, So moving forward on foreign policy, what do you think a Biden presidency is going to look like?
I think with foreign policy, there was a real shift under Obama in which we were essentially automating war. War became distant. It was the huge expansion of drone strikes, bigger use of sanctions, airstrikes, and proxies, sending arms deals to other countries so that they could fight these battles, and we weren't engaging a large volume of troops. I think for the most part, that's going to continue under Joe Biden. I know some people, some kind of paleo conservatives, MAGA types, even some people on the left have this fear that Biden is going to turn into George W. Bush and you're going to see these ground invasions. I think that's unlikely simply because I don't see any real political will for that. I mean, if Joe Biden decided to invade a country with a serious US presence, that would cost him politically. We saw it when Trump assassinated Soleimani. There was no energy for a war with Iran. It was at best exhaustion. So I think you're going to see perpetuation of the existing status quo, which isn't at all good. I mean, the sanctions are an atrocity. I mean, by some estimates, 40,000 Venezuelans died just under Trump sanctions. So it's serious and it's awful, but it's not going to be that visible. That gets to your point about people being asleep. I think the biggest country that's going to be in Biden's crosshairs for regime change is Syria. The reason I see Syria as the issue is that A, nobody's talking about it. B, when people like Max Blumenthal or Aaron Mate or Rania Kalik do talk about it, the smears are absolutely incredible and prevalent in a way that, if you're talking about pulling people out of Afghanistan, for example, you don't have that same response. So I don't necessarily think you're going to see a lot of troops moved into Syria. You're going to see some, but the sanctions will continue. And there's starvation sanctions. No one's speaking out against them. The Caesar Act sanctions passed via voice vote. I haven't seen, and I've looked, a single Democrat or Republican speak out against those sanctions, which is very unnerving. So Syria will be in the crosshairs. And I would also look, this might not be under Biden, but in the long term, countries along China's Belt and Road Initiative. These are the countries where China's looking to have trade and infrastructure partnerships. Those are going to be targets for proxy wars. So I don't think the United States is going to invade China. I don't think China is going to invade the United States. But you will see certain countries in the crosshairs where the United States can say, oh, there's a terrorist threat over here, or oh, this leader is oppressing their people and they're going to flood weapons into that region, support rebel groups, as a way of undermining China's development efforts. And because I'm seeing a lot of people also on the left speaking out against China's horrible human rights abuses, you're not going to see a lot of coherent pushback against these developments. So whether it happens under Biden or further down the road, that's something I'm keeping my eye on for sure.
Yeah, I definitely think that China is something that people need to be watching, just in general. I also think we need to pay attention to Africa. I think that, we have been, I mean, it was just a few years ago when we had, I think 4 troops killed. Was it in Niger or somewhere? And people were like, I didn't even know we were there. Like nobody had any idea that we were there. We spoke with Danny Surgeon, who is a retired major from the Army. And we talked about AFRICOM and how that all operates. So I think that, that's kind of something that's been flying under the radar. But I think you're absolutely right. I think war has changed drastically, not just in how it is waged and fought, but also in how it's covered. They learned a huge lesson after Vietnam that when you show war and the real consequences of war, that's not very popular. And so in the media, we do not see the body bags coming home. We don't see the devastation from the bombs that are dropped. It is kept behind a curtain. There's this facade where, we might see the bombs being shot off, and then you have some, jackass like Brian Williams, talking about how beautiful these weapons are. Meanwhile, they're, heading to go literally destroy human beings and explode human bodies. But that's really the only thing that people see of war anymore. And I think that has become this really dangerous kind of masking of people. People don't recognize it. It's like this far off concept where, oh yeah, we're at war, but people don't even think about what that actually means. So that's been really troubling to me to see, kind of moving forward. What do you think about Iran? This has been kind of a target for the United States for a while now. I am of the belief that Iran is not Iraq. Iran will absolutely fight back. But there's been a lot of bluster about Iran. Do you think that that's mostly, just a cover so that they can do other things in other places? Or do you think that Iran is something that we need to be worried about?
I don't think we need to be worried about Iran, of course, as a provocateur. I do agree with you that they are a much stronger, coherent operation than Saddam's Iraq was, but they're also sane. I mean, it's the same point I would make about Putin. You can criticize the leadership, but Iran's leadership, both in government and their religious leadership, are not crazy, they're not stupid, and they've shown a lot more restraint than the United States, of course, has in recent years. And I also think, Trump, the real neocon influence in Trump's administration was targeted towards Iran. That's where he was kind of fighting against the neocons with Afghanistan in particular, and Syria to an extent. But Iran, they had his ear. With Biden, again, any kind of real war with Iran would be political suicide. It just would. So I think the way Biden has approached Iran in the early stages is not promising. The idea that Iran has to get back into compliance is the typical imperial bluster that has marked Biden's entire career going back to the 1970s. So I think the real issue is going to be the sanctions. I don't see them being pulled away. I think that's going to be a real threat to Iranian civilians. You know, I don't think Iran wants to have a nuclear weapon. If they wanted one, they'd have one by now. They have the capabilities. And they are in a defensive position because they know the United States can continue to do a lot of damage. So I think the real risk with Iran and our relations with them will be the proxies. It'll continue to be issues with Syria, with operations in Iraq, and it's probably not going to have a significant impact on US troops. It's not going to be something that we notice domestically if we're not paying attention, but it could have a real issue to civilians in those countries. And like I said, the sanctions could continue with Iran. I don't know what's going to happen with the Iran deal. I've seen very mixed signals at times. Iran has shown that they absolutely want to re-enter it. I think there are 5 other countries involved, so this isn't just about the United States and Iran. But the United States pressuring Iran to get back into compliance and to use sanctions as a weapon, even though we were the ones who pulled out of the deal, is not a very promising development.
No, it's it's peak imperialism, where
Yeah.
we bounce out of the deal and then we punish them for us bouncing out of the deal. It's, it would be funny if it weren't so unbelievably destructive and damaging to so many people across the globe. But yeah, moving off of foreign policy, I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on where or how the Biden administration is going to deal with the economic crisis that we find ourselves in. In the Biden administration or the Obama administration, I keep doing that. The Obama administration with Biden as vice president, I mean, it was a complete destruction. Over 5 million people lost their homes. I mean, it was a nightmare for millions of people across the country. I don't see him, and people seem to think that he was going to be some saving grace or that Trump was the problem. And once Biden got in, they were going to help us. I definitely do not agree with that assessment at all. How do you think that they're going to address the economic crisis and the pandemic moving forward? They're not coming out of the gate very well here.
No, and I think there's been a lot of positive PR around Biden because the packages he's proposing are more significant than they were with Obama in 2009. A few things to keep in mind. One, the packages haven't passed yet. 2, the CARES Act was a massive package that largely benefited corporations and the ultra wealthy. So just because the government is putting a lot of money back into the economy, you have to be really careful about where that money is going. And the third point is that the crisis is in some ways worse now than it was in 2009. If Biden practiced Obama era austerity in the same fashion, that could cause problems even if you're wealthy, corporate, and self-involved. You can't have so much chaos at the bottom that it affects the top. So far what I've seen is that Joe Biden is going to put money into the economy to keep the worst crisis at bay, the real, chaos that could happen in the streets, because he's doing absolutely nothing. That's not good for business. This is why the Chamber of Commerce has supported Joe Biden's plans. It's not because the Chamber of Commerce is moving left. It's that they recognize that you have to put money back into the economy so people consume and that businesses, even big businesses, can survive. But I think his package is very revealing, which is that there's going to be the bare minimum directly given to people and huge subsidies to the insurance companies. Biden will try to put enough money so that there isn't chaos, but he's also going to make sure that he's flooding corporate America and industries with money to keep them afloat, keep them profitable, with absolutely no threat to power. He's not talking about limiting stock buybacks. He's not talking about antitrust. He's been completely absent on labor. His press secretary was asked about the Amazon unionization efforts in Alabama, and she said she didn't have an answer because Joe Biden hadn't given her a talking point on that. That tells you it's not even a topic of conversation, because the easiest thing for a Democrat to do is say, oh, of course I support unionization efforts. It's not even, in the subject. So I don't think you're going to see chaos under Joe Biden. You're just going to see an attempt to return to the 2016 status quo. What happened before Trump? That's bad enough. It gave us Donald Trump. It gave us a race between Trump and Hillary Clinton, and the absolute reestablishment of neoliberalism. We've seen that on the foreign policy landscape with very reactionary attitudes towards Russia. We're seeing it on the domestic landscape with Joe Biden winning the primary and largely having everyone circle their wagons around him, even though he's offering nothing really substantive. So you will see more spending under Joe Biden. You might see him try to raise the capital gains tax and corporate taxes a little bit to where they were, to short of where they were under Obama, but you're not going to see any kind of real systemic shift in power dynamics, which could lead to long-term changes. It's all going to be very, very short-term.
Yes, I 100% agree. It's all going to be very superficial, enough just to keep people from rioting, basically. You know, that's really, they just want to keep people happy enough that they will not rise up against the establishment. But you did mention something there that I find very interesting, and I'm interested to hear what you think. You know, you said that we were going to be returning to, you know, a pre-Trump sort of idea. And, you know, that was what gave us Trump to begin with. This has long been something that I've said, that if we, you know, elect somebody like a Joe Biden, who is part of the establishment that gave us the conditions that led to Trump, do you foresee us getting a worse Trump? And what I mean by worse is a more calculated, more controlled, more intelligent sort of version of Trump, you know, a smarter demagogue, somebody who can actually do some really terrible things. I think Trump was kind of a wild card. I don't think he really ever meant to be there. He didn't really know what he was doing. And it's been long been my fear that if we elect somebody like Joe Biden, we are going to end up with a much more dangerous version of Trump. And I think that, you know, we're seeing the Democrats almost, it almost seems intentional, like they're setting themselves up to fail. You know, lying about the $2,000 checks, making it 1,400. Now they want to means test it. That's not going to bode well for them in 2022. And it's certainly not going to bode well for them in 2024. So moving forward, do you have a fear that we are going to now get a much more dangerous version of Donald Trump in the 2024 election, or, you know, maybe even in 8 years if we don't get one then?
Yeah, I'm still not really sure the direction the Republican Party is going to take. You know, there's indications that they want to cut themselves off from Donald Trump entirely, but there's also plenty of dead enders. I think Josh Hawley is someone who lost credibility that he didn't expect to lose over the last month. So, my view is that John McCain would have been a worse president than Donald Trump. So the idea of a worse Donald Trump, it depends on your perspective. I think an austerity-driven Republican who is well ensconced in the neoconservative environment would be worse than Donald Trump, but in a way that a lot of ordinary Americans wouldn't necessarily notice. I don't think you're going to just see some. I don't really know. I don't know what a smarter, more calculating Donald Trump would look like, because somebody like that might actually be more coherent and effective on trade, for example. Donald Trump's analysis of our trade deals was better than someone who just says, no, NAFTA was great, but he didn't really understand trade and how it works. He saw it as China screwing us when it was really corporations screwing workers. So, a smarter Trump might actually be better on some issues, but worse than others. I also think things like the Muslim ban and child separation at the border backfired. These were not popular policies. Even among Republicans who voted for Donald Trump as he was screaming, build the wall, their approval rating of child separation was barely positive. And when you factor in the Democratic electorate, it was like 25-30% overall. So my real concern is less to do with a more coherent Donald Trump. It's just the reinforcement of neoliberalism. Left neoliberalism as shown by Biden, right neoliberalism as shown by someone like John McCain. I think that's the real fear. The real fear is that things are getting worse, and so the status quo is naturally going to lead to a continued degeneration of our institutions, of labor, of peace and diplomatic efforts overseas. That's remains my concern, but I could be proven wrong. I've absolutely no idea the direction the Republicans are taking. They're all over the place right now.
The Republican Party is very interesting to me right now. There's some
Yeah.
rumors flying around about Donald Trump potentially starting a third party. There's been a lot of interest in that from elected Republicans, which I think is very interesting. You're right. There are a lot of dead enders out there who will follow Donald Trump if he does start a third party. It's hard for me to take him seriously on that, because I still don't think that he ever intended to actually be elected as president. So it's weird that he wants to start a third party. I figured he would start some sort of media organization, like he wanted to do to begin with. But the Republican Party is very much in this weird kind of like a turning point. They're at like this weird turning point where do they continue with where Trump was headed? Do they try to get back to where they were in like the John McCain sort of time period? So yeah, they are kind of a wild card. It's really kind of interesting because the Democratic Party seems to be very established at this point. They destroyed Bernie Sanders. They smashed that whole threat to the status quo. I mean, just neutered it. Like Bernie Sanders is now, gaslighting for war criminals. They've completely neutered him and his movement. So they seem to be on like a very stable footing. And the Republican Party is very much in flux right now. And so that you're right. That's going to be an interesting thing to see how that plays out over the next couple of years, over the next 4 years. I'm interested to see what the midterms do, just based on the fact that the Democrats are really shooting themselves in the foot repeatedly, daily, it seems like. So it really could go either way, I guess, because neither party is really offering much of anything to anybody. It would be nice to see some sort of third party gain momentum, and kind of at least challenge that a little bit. Do you have any hope that that's going to happen, whether it's Movement for a People's Party, whether it's the Green Party, whether it's a Libertarian Party? Whatever party, or some new entirely new idea that comes out over the next couple of years? Do you have any hope that the third party can take hold in this current system? I personally do not. I mean, I'm interested to hear what you have to say about that.
No, I mean, if it's developing the way parties traditionally do, no. I don't think it's going to come from the Green Party. I don't think it's going to come from the People's Party. It's not like I'm saying I hope they don't. It would be great if they did. But I don't have any hope either. I think if there's going to be a real challenge to either party, both parties, it's going to come specifically from labor. It's going to come from Walmart cashiers, Amazon fulfillment center workers, migrant farmers, understanding their similarities, coming together and starting to dictate politics on their terms. I don't see that happening soon. I'm not predicting it. But I am saying if there is going to be a threat to the two-party system, it will come from labor because they have the numbers and they have the leverage. They just haven't been using it yet.
Yes, I
Right
absolutely
now,
agree with that.
unions, yeah, and unions are completely beholden to the Democratic Party. They will have their little policy package and make their little endorsements, but it is understood they will always fall in line for Joe Biden, for Hillary Clinton, for Barack Obama, whoever else. And so they have no power. They can be ignored. So my small hope is that maybe some Democrats over the next few years pass moderate legislation that makes it easier to unionize, and then over time, labor becomes stronger and really takes power for themselves. Whether that looks like a third party or whether it's just influencing the parties that already exist, I don't know, but I don't see any real change happening if it doesn't come through labor.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that, they're working overtime right now to keep the working class fighting amongst ourselves, through whatever means necessary, because I think that they have long known that that is the threat. And now we just need to get the people to realize that that's the threat and that we are actually way more powerful than we know. But we need numbers. It's a numbers game. And you cannot be super picky about who you're going to go to battle with when you're fighting an institution as powerful as the American government. It's going to take numbers. It's going to take, reaching out to people that you don't necessarily agree with on everything. And you can still not agree with them on everything. That's okay. Like, it's okay to not agree with everybody on everything. But you're going to have to come together for a common cause if you ever wish to make a difference in the way that our system is run right now. That's just the way that it is. But they are going to work overtime to make sure that that doesn't happen. And it's going to take, people being willing to speak out about that and have conversations, difficult conversations with people they don't agree with, for anything like that to happen. And you're right, it's not going to happen anytime soon. I don't know if people are willing to make that sort of conscious shift into, being able to stand side by side with somebody that you don't like and that you don't agree with. I think that's tough for people, which is unfortunate. But you've been very generous with your time. We've been going for a little bit, about an hour-ish. But before we wrap up, I did want to talk about the Amplifier Project, which we mentioned at the top that you're a contributor for. I just kind of accidentally came across it just from having following you on Twitter and seeing the videos that are posted, the Ask Jesse videos. Can you tell us a little bit about Amplifier Project and what you guys are doing over there, the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it was started by Victoria Hall, who I met on Twitter, and she's been, collecting a lot of different voices, both in terms of politics and spirituality and artistic endeavors. and putting it together on that site. And so we've done a podcast together, talking mostly about politics and current events. I've written a few articles. I wrote one called Yemen and the Truth, in which I go back and look at our history with Saudi Arabia and how that's, and the real reasons why we've been at war against Yemen in particular, away from what we've been told. And we've been on a hiatus with Ask Jesse for a while, but we generally do weekly podcasts. You can send questions into the Amplifier Project for me to answer to the best of my abilities. And I'm sure Joe Biden will provide plenty of opportunities for content.
Very true. Okay, so as we wrap up, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter, where they can find Amplifier Project, where they can find Victoria Hall. She's great on Twitter as well. If anybody wants to follow her, just give everybody, some information about the places they can find your work.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Jesse Crall, JesseCrall. Victoria is on Twitter at VICTOREEAH. And the Amplifier Project is just amplifierproject.com.
Nice. Okay. Well, our guest today has been Jesse Crall. And like I said, I've been following him on Twitter. He has really interesting takes and is, very knowledgeable about everything that's going on. So it's definitely a must follow. Victoria is also great. And yeah, I love the Ask Jesse videos that like I said, I kind of accidentally stumbled into them just from following both of you on Twitter. And I didn't even realize that you did them. And then all of a sudden, I think Victoria posted one, and I don't remember what it was about, but it was, a couple months ago, 3 months ago or something. And I was like, I didn't know they did this. So everybody should go check that out. And yeah, thanks everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Jesse, for being our guest. I appreciate it very much. And we will catch you next time.
Thanks for having me.